Greetings and welcome to my channel. This is Sorcerer Tal. You can also find me on Facebook in the Sorcerers Guild. Today on Experimental Magic, we are going to be returning to the potato golem experiment that I attempted earlier this year. As some of you may recall, in January of this year, I attempted to make a potato golem by first using my knocker to gain the potato's attention, and then communing with the potato, and then naming it Odell, carving a face into the front of it and a sigil into its back. I then anointed the potato with some of my yeast minions, which is also from previous videos. I'll leave a link to that here. And then I put that potato in a brown paper sack with my sigil on it and placed it in the recesses of the shelves on in my temple room here. Okay. Then, when spring came, I retrieved the bag and we did the Odell reveal. Those of you that have been following along with this may recall, I opened up the bag hoping that the potato would have grown some sprouts. There seemed to be very little eyelet growth at all, unfortunately. However, the face had become quite visible, as well as the sigil on the back of the potato. Despite the lack of eyelet growth, I decided to go ahead and grow the potato anyways, hoping to create a plant that had been enchanted to help me with my works, named Odell. With those of you following along, I did grow a plant named Hope, which is in some other videos that I've been working with. But this is with the potato in the hopes of making a golem. So, as I said, I went ahead and planted the potato in the garden with the hopes that a potato plant would grow up, and then I was going to do a third video about the potato plant as it grew. Unfortunately, the potato never actually grew, so we never got to that third video. About 3 days later, I found that it had been dug up. Had not been eaten, so it wasn't like my dog dug it up and ate it. The plant I'm not sure how it got dug up, but it was dug up. I went ahead and reburied it and left it there for the remainder of the year with no growth at any point in time. In the fall, out of curiosity, I went ahead and dug the plant back up. I went ahead and dug the area back up, and there was not a potato there either. Now, in that video, I did mention that there was precedent for this type of activity in a being known as an alderon, which is carved from a mandrake root and then buried at the crossroads. It is immediately dug back up and then carried by the person. I am wondering if maybe when the potato had been dug back up, if I had taken the potato then and brought it back into the house, if there might have been some usefulness from the potato in that way. But I didn't. I buried it back in the ground. And so now we're going to start over again. Now, since then, I have decided to adjust the experiment quite a bit. It is always important to learn from the failures in our previous experiments, yeah? And one of the things that I found there is, I don't think burying him in the ground was a good idea after I'd given him a face. It's, like I said, it came back up out of the ground 3 days later. And that is the precedent set with this type of experiment. And there's also some things that I want to go over about when you are planning an experiment. Number one, do your research. I didn't do enough research into the potatoes. And this isn't just magical research, like that about the alderon. I did find that out a little bit late. I wish I had thought about that before I began the experiment. I had heard of the alderon before, but it had been years, not something I'd thought about a lot. And then I came across it again after I'd already planned on burying Odell. So, do our research. Do your magical research. But also, mundane research about components, yeah? It turns out that a lot of store-bought potatoes actually have a chemical sprayed on them to inhibit them from sprouting. Of course, it doesn't always work, clearly, because, you get potatoes sprouting out of the bags all the time, but there was something actually inhibiting, on a mundane level, inhibiting what I was trying to do. And that would have been useful to know so that I could have washed the potato off. And I've also, through mundane research, discovered that it is easier to get a potato to sprout exposed than inside a brown paper bag. So, we are going to adjust the experiment accordingly in those ways, but also, one of the things that I left out with designing the original Koptefel potato golem was a purpose. Yeah? I just named it Koptefel and stuck it in a bag hoping to create a being. Well, what was Koptefel going to do? I hadn't put a lot of thought into that. I was more excited by the idea of trying the experiment. So, this golem will have a purpose, which we will get to in a moment when I begin explaining that experiment, but we're going to keep going over this part for a bit. So, this golem, as I said, the next golem will have a purpose. Also, really, I just kind of took a random potato out of the bag. Taking it out of the bag apparently was part of the mistake, unless it's an organic potato, and then attempted to commune with the potato on the spot with the knocker. That isn't really enough forethought for something like this. So this time, I went to the store looking for an organic potato, and I went to the loose potatoes, and rather than just grabbing a potato at random, I spent a while, as I'm standing in the middle of a grocery store doing this, go ahead and picture that, attempting to commune with the potatoes until one drew my attention. And I selected one, this one here, that perhaps you don't see it, but I see kind of a face and a bit of personality in the potato already. So, it's important that we choose our components properly. There will be some other changes I've made with this potato golem that we're going to be working on now. And also, we want to make sure that we get into the proper state. Okay, so that's most of the lesson. That's essentially the lessons that I learned from the previous experiment. Is don't forget to give a created being a purpose, an intent to create their form around. It's not just a name isn't really quite enough with something this complex. It needs a reason. Pick your components carefully, and don't just pick life force at random, yeah? Even with potatoes. I know it may sound absurd, but there are potatoes that are more suited for this kind of work than others, yeah? Just like there isn't anything else. If you're going to use something with life force, choose that life force carefully. Don't just pick one at random. And so, there are some other layers that I've added as well. But let's go ahead and begin discussing how this spell and experiment this time is going to go. What we will do is I have taken the potato here. Like I said, I went to the store and picked it specifically. I chose one also just to be sure. I picked one that already has a little bit of growth on it already. And this potato is never going to be buried. Okay, so now on to today's experiment. We will be creating a potato golem from an organic potato, which, as you can see, already has a few sprouts. So we won't be dealing with the sprout inhibitor. And I gave this particular potato a purpose. It is going to help me create a foundation, a balanced foundation in healing work, which is why its sigil looks like that. It's a triangle balanced on a foundation with 3 tripod legs for strength and stability. And Odell will help me with healing work. Okay, so before we go any farther, I would also like to clarify, just for the record, how I define a golem. I'm not expecting this potato to jump up off my altar eventually and start helping me with healing work, okay? Reiki type stuff and stuff like that. I'm not expecting it to suddenly jump up and become my healing assistant. It'd be great if it does, but you know, I'm just like I don't expect to be able to cast a fireball. I don't expect this potato to jump up off of my altar and start helping me. It is going to be helping me channel those energies and create that energy. I define a golem as a created being whose astral form matches its vessel. And what that means is that, well, how I picture it in my mind as I'm creating this form on the astral around the intent of the name Odell and the intent of helping me generate a foundation of balance for healing purposes, is that I imagine him, I imagine him to look like this will look when it is done. And imagine then the sprouts growing, and that the form will grow into the vessel. The astral form will grow into the vessel and change with the potato as it grows. Okay? So we're not at any point expecting this potato to jump up off the table, as cool as that would be. Alright. So, how did I pick the name Odell? As I said, it is important to commune with these spirits as we create them. It's important to commune with the potato itself if you are going to try and create it into something else. If you're going to try and use its life force, you need to commune with that life force. So this time, rather than just knocking on it with the knocker to draw it into awareness and speaking with it through tongue writing, I have had it on my altar for several days already. After, essentially going to the grocery store and asking which potato wanted to work with me, I then brought it home and have had it on my altar for several days. I allowed it to help me with its naming even. The name, in fact, the name Odell, how I got that was I took this potato and I placed it on my altar, or excuse me, not on my altar, on this table here, which I guess is a small altar, and then I put my tray on here and I used Scrabble pieces and threw them out on the table and rearranged the available letters until they spelled out a name that seemed to suit the potato. And that name was Odell. I then made the sigil from those letters and did my best to give it a shape denoting balance and strength, but also channeling. And that's why it's the circle with the beams coming out. It's not just a tripod, there's also beams, because it's going to help me channel healing energies when I do Reiki and other healing type spell work. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and slip farther into Gnosis and begin the spell, which is another thing I didn't really last time. I feel I spent too much time concerning myself with narrating what I was doing and not enough time actually doing the spell. So The first thing that I would be doing then is carving the face. While carving the face, you'll want to be sure not to damage any of the eyelets. Even though it is ironic that you're carving eyes, you want to avoid the eyes while you're doing so. If you decide to attempt a similar experiment yourself. So there's 2 eyes. Give him a little nose here. There we go. There's the nose, 2 eyes, nose. Now there's actually part of where I said I saw a face. I know I just said not to damage the eyelets, but there is an kind of a mouth right here already. So we're going to carve around that and try to not damage that eye there as much as we can in the process. But that is definitely where I saw the mouth. Delicate as we carve around that eyelid. Of course, I'm not sure how much we want a sprout coming right out of its mouth anyways. So, you know what? We are going to go ahead and take that off after all. Because we really don't want a sprout coming out the middle of its mouth anyways. Certainly isn't anything I was envisioning. We probably shouldn't go so deep, but it'll be fine. Oh, okay. So there's that. There's our little face there. Place him on the table like that. Now, another thing I forgot last time was some smoke. As far as what scent to use with this type of operation, really it depends on what you're creating. Me, I just really like the smell of vanilla, and I associate it with healing. So this is just a vanilla incense. The more important part is the smoke itself. I just want to kind of bathe the potato in smoke. Just to cleanse the potato, but also to just help you charge it. Get your mind on what you're doing. Good way to focus your mind. I'm going to be doing the breath of life when I name Odell here, but we're not to that point just yet. The next part is to put on the sticker. Rather than carving the sigil in Odell's back, I am going to be putting it on this stick, putting a sticker onto his vase here. Now, there's one more thing that we're going to be doing before we bring Odell before we begin attempting to bring Odell into a greater form of consciousness. And we decided we wanted to do that before we brought him into consciousness, just because it seems odd to be... Well, it just seems unesthetically pleasing to bring the golem to life and then start shoving pins through him. Well, skewers. Because we need to put skewers through the potato, hold him up, and allow him to sprout down into the water. So, before we do that, let's go ahead and do these. And then actually we're going to, rather than putting two of them all the way through him, let's try it like this. Alright. There we are. Let me take some of this one off. Quite a bit of it, actually. There we are. Okay. Now that he looks pretty much like I pictured him looking in the beginning, hold him like this and begin charging him with the energy that I wish to channel. Okay, now, rather than using the yeast minions like I did in the previous experiment, I'm going to be anointing Odell with this water here. That is from my servitor tanks. So this is, you'll actually have seen in previous videos, water from my servitor tanks connected to my altar. And then once we are done with all of this, I will be putting Odell up on my altar next to those altar tanks in his own tank here. So, before I do that, let's give him a little more charged. And then after I anoint him is when I will be doing the breath of life and doing the actual naming. Odell. Come to me, Odell. Rise, Odell. I give you life. Come to me, Odell. And then we'll place him in there like so. And then in a moment here, I'll place him on my altar. And when I will begin communing with Odell daily, rather than having him somewhere attempting to sprout in the darkness. He'll be on my altar in an area where there's a little bit of light coming in, and I will commune with him, giving him more attention rather than ignoring him, and we'll see how that works. Okay, so that will be it for this episode. Thank you once again for joining us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please take the opportunity to do so now. Until next time, bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tal.